Hello, and welcome to Aviation Deep Dive. The Soviet invasion in Finland on November 30th, 1939, would go down in history as a prime example of a minor nation showing unparalleled bravery in the face of Soviet oppression. The Finnish Air Force, wholly unprepared for such an invasion, fielded only 2 fighter squadrons at the outbreak of the war. Of these, only Flying Squadron 4 was seriously equipped with a relatively modern fighter, the Fokker D-21. Armed with 2 twin-millimeter cannons and twin 7.7mm machine guns, the D-21 was an aircraft between 2 very different eras of aviation, with the armament of the future, though with some antiquated design features such as non-retractable landing gear. Nevertheless, it was certainly not a bad aircraft by the late 1930 standards, and it would be heavily relied upon by the Finnish to defend their country from the Soviet threats. Jorma Sarvanto, a pilot of Flying Squadron 4, having initially been posted with the rather antiquated Bristol Bulldog fighters, and then later flying as a navigator of a Bristol Blenheim, though after his promotion to lieutenant in 1937, he requested to be transferred to a frontline fighter squadron. Jorma was 25 at the time and would end up being a serious asset to the Finns, immediately taking to the Fokker and demonstrating serious skill. In fact, he was the highest scoring on his course for pilot training, and his skill would soon be tested in the metal of battle under the cold skies of Northern Europe. Jorma's honeymoon was actually cut short by the Soviet invasion, and he would receive his baptism of fire, his first experience of combat, on the 19th of December, 1939. Over the following days, he scored 2 aerial victories, both on marauding Tupolev SB bombers, part of a high-speed bomber regiment. Jorma had proved himself in training and now in active service to be a seriously capable fighter pilot, and so the stage was set for the event that would get the world's attention. It was the early morning of the 6th of January, 1940, with freezing temperatures of -9 degrees Celsius. Unknown to the Finns, 17 Soviet DB-3 bombers had taken off from their base in Estonia and were en route to the city of Kuopio in western Finland. Split into 2 groups, the first group of 8 bombers reached the city and dropped their payload, though the second had lost their bearings in some cloud and had ended up 100 miles south of their intended target, instead of flying over the town of Uti. First Lieutenant Eric Sovelius, a squadron mate of Jorma, was at the time on combat patrol of the area and was directed by radio operators on the ground to intercept the second group of Soviet bombers.
Huomio Sovelius, täällä koti. Vihollisten pommittajia karttaruudussa Iivari Kristo 27, lentosuunta etelään, loppu.
Locating the formation, Sovelius climbed up to them and managed to critically damage one bomber, claiming it destroyed. He had, however, expended all of his ammunition and returned back to the airfield. The 7 remaining bombers continued onwards towards their target, eventually finding it, dropping their payload and turning back to head back to Estonia, following the route by which they had flown. At this point, Flying Squadron 4, along with Jorma Sarvanto, was urgently scrambled to intercept the bomber formation. Jorma, on alert duty, ran to his plane and started the engine with the help of a mechanic. Ikonen, another pilot on duty, had also ran to his aircraft and was waiting for the order to go. First to get airborne, Jorma observed that the other Fokkers on the airfield were still being worked on after their previous flight and would not be ready for at least a few minutes. Seeing the formation edge away with every passing second, Jorma decided to press on his attack, attacking the 7-strong formation alone.
Seuraa ryssän pommikoneformaatiota. Saan laskettua 7.
Full throttle, Jorma guided his aircraft up towards the formation, reaching their altitude whilst he was about 500 meters behind them. Selecting the leftmost aircraft in the formation, Jorma settled behind them and began closing in. Taking some bullets from an accurate burst of return fire, he then took aim on the engine of the bomber and fired a volley, setting the aircraft alight.
Yksi hoidettu, tuhottu.
Pumping with adrenaline, Jorma had barely seen the first DB-3 go down when his sights found the starboard engine of the second bomber, which went down with an engine fire almost identical to the first. Yanking the stick to avoid the tenacious fire from the 5 remaining aircraft, Jorma found himself on the other side of the formation, where yet another 2 bombers were hit fatally by the pinpoint accurate fire of the Finn. Flames pouring from the 2 aircraft that were spiraling towards the snowy fields below, the Soviet bomber formation had suddenly found itself with only 3 aircraft left in just a couple of minutes. Firing with short, disciplined bursts, Jorma fell in between the bombers, conducting quick turns to tail a bomber for a split second, fire, and then break off again, so as to not present an easy target for any return fire. Another DB-3 pulled up steeply and broke formation after being peppered with the cannon and machine gun fire. Just 2 bombers left, Jorma found himself out of cannon ammunition, having only 60 rounds per gun.
Берегись, мы вдвоем, единственные остались. Зайди в строй, пересечем его огонь.
Now having only his twin machine gun armament, the Finnish pilot fired on the 2 remaining aircrafts. Now having to commit to longer bursts, the DB-3s were significantly more durable to the light machine gun fire and were taking significantly more hits. Finally though, the Fokker managed to set one of the aircraft alight, which peeled off, leaving just 1 solitary Soviet bomber in the crisp Finnish skies. Turning to engaging, Jorma conducted a couple of fast sweeping attacks until his guns finally fell silent. He had completely emptied his magazines.
Perkele, ammukset loppu.
Frustrated, Jorma turned back and headed north back towards his airfield, the aircraft running on fumes at this point. However, the 2 other Fokkers had finally managed to get airborne and passed Jorma on the way back, who quickly directed them to the heading of the sole remaining Soviet bomber. Lieutenant Sovilius and Sergeant Ikonin went at full power towards the location of the aircraft, finally spotting it nearing the southern coast of Finland.
Sovelius, kello 3 alhaalla. Ryssän pommittaja.
Selvä Ikonen, näen hänet.
Tähtää moottoreihin ja ammun merkistäni. Aloitan syöksyn nyt.
Lining up and peppering the DB-3 with cannon and machine gun fire, the stricken Soviet bomber stayed aloft for a few seconds before plunging earthward, out of control, Sovilius claiming the kill.
Sovelius, luulen, että laustoitko hänet pudotti kiven. Selvä.
Jorma's Fokker had been damaged significantly during the engagement by return fire. The radio and battery had been hit and destroyed, as well as the pneumatic system of the aircraft, meaning the flaps could not be deployed. Nevertheless, he managed to bring it in for a landing at Uti, disembarked, and inspected his trusty aircraft. It transpired that the aircraft had been struck no less than 23 times by the gunners of the Soviet bombers. It was in this moment that the enormity of the situation began to be realized. Jorma had not only become the first ace of the Second World War, he had done it in less than 5 minutes, shooting down 6 DB-3s in just 4 minutes. It wasn't long before the press grabbed hold of the story, and the photographs of Jorma holding a number 5, recovered from one of the downed bombers, began circulating in the newspapers all around the world. Many of the Soviet aircrew were killed during the fight. 5 of the 6 aircrafts had crashed in steep dives after losing control, and 1 attempted to glide down for an emergency landing, but exploded in mid-air. Only 2 of the 28 Soviet aircrew survived, both of whom were captured shortly after by the Finnish authorities. Jorma continued to fly throughout the Winter War, having of course become something of a legend amongst the Finnish population, and a symbol of resistance against the Soviet war machine. Continuing to score victories, the Soviets were forced to change tactics in the light of ever-mounting losses at the hands of the plucky Finnish fighters. Jorma would in fact become the first ace of the Second World War to surpass 10 kills, finishing his combat career during the Continuation War, flying Brewster B-239s and with 17 aerial victories under his belt. Thank you so much for watching this video of Aviation Deep Dive. Consider liking and subscribing for more weekly content. And please also consider supporting us on Patreon. See you in the skies.